At 7:17 in the morning, local time in southern Iran, 3 heavy trucks rolled slowly along a dusty desert road. There were no escort vehicles, no military markings, no radio chatter. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary convoy. Just another group of transport trucks moving through the desert like hundreds of others every week. But the drivers had no idea that for the past 40 minutes, they had been under constant surveillance by the United States military. High above them, an American reconnaissance satellite had already detected their movement. And from the moment that detection happened, the convoy's fate was quietly being decided thousands of miles away. Nearly an hour earlier, the satellite's tracking system noticed an unusual pattern in the convoy's movement. Within seconds, the onboard target recognition algorithm began comparing the vehicles with entries in a military database. 9 seconds later, the system reached a conclusion. The size of the cargo section, the chassis design, and the structural profile matched almost perfectly with a known military platform, a transporter erector launcher, commonly called a TEL. This type of mobile launcher is widely used by Iran to deploy short-range ballistic missiles like the Fateh 110. In modern warfare, a TEL is one of the simplest ways to turn a truck into a missile launch platform capable of striking targets hundreds of kilometers away. Once deployed, a Fateh 110 missile can reach targets nearly 300 kilometers, putting multiple American and Allied bases in the region within striking distance. The satellite's report was immediately transmitted to the Forward Operations Center of US Central Command at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. From that moment, the convoy became a live target. But surprisingly, the order to strike was not given. Instead, commanders made a different decision. Track them, follow them, let them lead us somewhere. To maintain visual surveillance, an MQ-9 Reaper drone operating roughly 70 kilometers away was redirected toward the convoy. Flying at more than 25,000 feet, the unmanned aircraft moved silently into position above the trucks. From that altitude, the Reaper could observe the vehicles without being detected. A few minutes later, something unusual happened. The lead truck suddenly slowed down and turned off the dirt road, moving into a wide open patch of desert. The 2 trucks behind it stopped as well, spreading out roughly 200 meters apart. It was a classic military spacing maneuver. If one vehicle was hit, the others might survive. Then the tarp covering the lead truck began to slide backward. On the drone's infrared camera feed, a long metallic structure slowly emerged from the truck bed. The hydraulic system engaged. Centimeter by centimeter, the launcher frame began rising upward. It was unmistakable. A ballistic missile launcher was being erected in the middle of the desert. Inside the command center in Qatar, tension rose immediately. Once the launcher reached vertical position, the missile could be fired within minutes. That meant American and Allied bases across the region could suddenly be under threat. At that moment, the final command was issued. Cleared hot. The MQ-9 Reaper adjusted its position, locking the target into the center of its laser designation system. Mounted under the drone's wings were AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, already armed and ready. Each Hellfire missile was about 1.6 meters long, designed to destroy armored vehicles and harden targets with extremely high precision. A flash appeared beneath the drone's wing. The first Hellfire dropped free and ignited its rocket motor. Within seconds, it accelerated toward the ground, diving toward the launcher. On the desert floor, the Iranian crew was still focused on their work. The launcher continued rising. The Fateh 110 missile was now clearly visible. Just a few more moments and it could have been ready to fire. But it would never reach that point. Only 8 seconds after launch, the Hellfire struck. The missile slammed into the truck bed where the launcher mechanism had just been raised. The explosion ripped through the vehicle. The shockwave hurled metal panels and debris in every direction. Inside the launcher system were fuel tanks, electronics, and a missile warhead weighing nearly 500 kilograms. Moments later, a second explosion erupted as the missile fuel ignited. A towering column of fire shot into the air. Metal fragments from the destroyed launcher scattered across the desert. On the Reaper's infrared display, the target had become a massive, glowing heat signature. One launcher, worth millions of dollars, had been reduced to burning wreckage. But the attack was not over. The other two trucks immediately tried to escape. Their engines roared as the drivers attempted to flee the blast zone, but a second Hellfire missile was already on the way. It struck the rear of the second vehicle, directly where the launcher frame and control systems were mounted. A burst of flame flashed outward. The launcher collapsed instantly as the vehicle was torn apart by the explosion. Within seconds, the second TEL disappeared from the drone's thermal display. Only one truck remained. The third vehicle spun around and accelerated westward, trying to escape. This time, however, the command center made a different decision. Do not fire. Track it. From high above, the MQ-9 continued following the fleeing vehicle. The driver had no idea the drone was still watching. 20 minutes later, the truck reached the base of a low mountain ridge and entered a small industrial compound. On the infrared display, several new heat signatures appeared. Trucks, generators, and long metal warehouse structures. Inside the operations center in Qatar, the realization was immediate. This was not just a convoy. It was a missile depot. The coordinates were confirmed multiple times and transmitted through the military's Link 16 tactical network. But the weapon chosen to strike this target would not come from the drone. Nearly 1,200 kilometers away, in the Arabian Sea, a US Navy destroyer had just received its orders. On the deck of the warship, the hatches of the Mark 41 vertical launch system opened. Seconds later, a column of fire erupted as a Tomahawk cruise missile launched into the sky. The booster rocket propelled it upward before separating. Small wings unfolded from the missile's body. Then the turbofan engine ignited. From that moment, the Tomahawk dropped to low altitude and accelerated toward its target. Flying at roughly 880 kilometers per hour, it skimmed across the terrain just a few hundred feet above the ground. At that height, long-range radar systems struggle to detect it because the curvature of the Earth hides the missile from view. This low-altitude flight profile is exactly what the Tomahawk was designed for. It slips through radar gaps and approaches targets with very little warning. Inside the operations center in Qatar, officers watched the missile's progress on their tactical display. Above the target area, the MQ-9 Reaper continued transmitting live imagery of the compound. The third truck had stopped inside one of the warehouses. Several other structures nearby suggested something much larger than a single launcher. This was a full deployment depot. 30 minutes after launch, the Tomahawk reached the target zone. In the final phase of flight, its terrain-matching guidance system compared the landscape below with stored digital maps. The missile adjusted its course for maximum accuracy. On the ground, the compound remained quiet. The Iranian crew believed they had escaped the earlier strike. They had no idea what was coming. Moments later, the Tomahawk dropped slightly lower, then it punched straight through the metal roof of the warehouse. The explosion was immediate. The missile's nearly 450-kilogram warhead detonated inside the structure. A massive fireball erupted from the center of the compound. Inside the warehouse were trucks, launchers, missiles, and fuel. The blast triggered a chain reaction. Secondary explosions rippled through the complex as stored warheads and missile fuel ignited. On the drone's infrared feed, the entire compound became a massive burning heat signature. 2 launchers had been destroyed on the road. 40 minutes later, the entire depot that supported them had been erased. High above the battlefield, the MQ-9 Reaper continued circling as the fires burned below. Battle damage assessment systems quickly analysed the thermal data and debris patterns. The conclusion came quickly. At least 3 missile launchers and multiple support vehicles had been destroyed. The depot itself had been completely eliminated. For US Central Command, the significance went far beyond a single strike. Those 3 trucks had only been the visible part of a much larger missile deployment network. Destroying the depot meant other launchers in the region would now be forced to relocate, disrupting Iran's ability to conduct further missile attacks. The MQ-9 eventually turned away from the target area, its mission complete. Under its wings, the missile racks were empty. But the most important decision of the entire operation had happened earlier, when commanders chose not to destroy the third truck immediately. If all 3 launchers had been destroyed on the road, the depot might never have been discovered. Instead, by continuing to track the escaping vehicle, they found the hidden storage site. And when the Tomahawk struck that warehouse, It didn't just eliminate 3 launchers, it erased an entire missile deployment centre. Hours later, the first images of the operation appeared in international media. US Central Command released footage showing Iranian mobile missile launchers being destroyed while disguised as civilian transport trucks. According to US officials, Iran often hides its missile launchers by moving them across remote desert routes disguised as ordinary cargo vehicles. But modern surveillance networks, combining satellites, drones, and advanced targeting algorithms, make it increasingly difficult to hide those systems. The US military said its campaign to neutralize missile threats in the region is ongoing, and analysts say the destruction of mobile launchers may be the single most important factor in reducing missile attacks. Because in modern warfare, you don't always need to destroy every missile. Sometimes, destroying the trucks that carry them into battle is enough to bring the entire system to a halt.